This is the video lesson for What are Forces? The learning target for this lesson is, I am learning to describe a force as an interaction between two objects or systems. The success criteria for this lesson are, I can identify contact and non-contact forces. I can identify when a force is being exerted between two objects. I can describe forces as vector quantities. And I can describe how forces are summed together. So what are forces? So a force occurs when two or more objects interact. It's going to be a push or a pull resulting from that interaction. So when the interaction stops, the forces stop. So our units for force are kilograms times meters per second squared, which we call the Newton. So a Newton is a kilogram times meters per second squared. And that'll make a lot more sense why we use that unit when we get a little bit further into our discussion about forces. So what are some types of forces? So there are two main categories of forces that we're going to talk about. There are contact forces and non-contact forces. So examples of contact forces are the normal force, an applied force, and a tension force. So examples of non-contact forces are gravity, electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. Those are the main non-contact forces that exist. There are other examples of contact forces, of course, but those are just a few that we're going to deal with in this class. So what causes certain contact forces? So the normal force is when two things are pressing against each other. The normal force is the force that exists between those two forces. So if a book is laying on a table, the book presses down on the table, and the table presses back on the book, that table pressing back on the book is the normal force. So friction is a force that opposes motion. So if something is moving across a surface, the force that opposes that motion, the force that the surface exerts on the thing that's moving, is the friction force. So friction force can be thought of as a microscopic interaction between atoms of objects in close proximity. So the forces that exist between objects as they are interacting with each other is that friction force. So it's made up of repulsive electrostatic forces. So if you think about at the atomic level, we've got these electrons in their outer shells that are part of two things. So you have the electrons in your hand and you have the electrons in your other hand, and as they come close together, they're repulsing each other. And so those forces are what come together, are repulsing each other, and that's part of what causes friction. Okay, so forces are vectors. So we need to know two pieces of information about a force to really know everything about it. So we need to know the size of the force, that's its magnitude, and we need to know the direction that the force is being exerted in. So with those two pieces of information, we know that the force is a vector. So forces are vector quantities. Okay, so let's talk a minute about the sum of forces. So you can add forces together, just like you can add any kind of vector together. So you add up all the forces acting on an object separately in each direction. So if we're thinking about the forces in the x direction, you're going to add up those forces. And then if we think about the forces acting in the y direction, you're going to add up those forces. So you add up those forces separately, so you have the sum of forces in the x direction and the sum of forces in the y direction. So the y-axis you have in the up direction is positive and the down direction is negative. That's the convention that we use most often. And then on the y-axis, or excuse me, in the x-axis, you have the rightward is positive and the leftward is negative. So we use the symbol sigma, that's the big E, and the F, that's the sum of forces. So if we wanted to know the sum of forces in the y direction, we would have the big sigma, the capital sigma, the big E, and the F, and then we put a little y there, subscript y, and then we would show what our sum of forces are. We also have the net force. So the net force and the sum of forces are interchangeable for the most part. So the net force tells us what the net force in a particular direction is, or the total net force on an object. Alright, so what have we learned in this video? So there are different kinds of forces. There are two main types of forces, contact and non-contact forces. And we're going to talk mostly about contact forces and gravity in this class. So forces are vectors. To describe a force fully, you must include both its magnitude and its direction. So that's the only way to really describe a force in its full entirety. And then we talked a little bit about the sum of forces. So forces are summed in the x direction and in the y direction to determine the net force acting on an object. All right, thanks everybody.